vamos dar início ao quarto Fórum do Encontro do Setor de Feiras e Eventos. É com muito prazer que nós recebemos o Mr. Paul Woodward, Diretor-Geral da UFI. Paul Woodward foi eleito em 2010 como Diretor-Geral da UFI, associação que reúne os principais organizadores de feiras e negócios do mundo. Antes de chegar à presidência, Paul foi gerente regional da UFI para a Ásia e Pacífico e o dirigente acumula ainda passagens pela Miller Freeman, Ásia e hoje UBM Ásia. Mr. Paul, obrigado por estar conosco aqui.
Use this. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Well, it's Octavio, thank you very much for your invitation to join you all here today. It's a, oops, forward quick, there we go. It's a real pleasure to be back in Brazil and an honor to be asked to kick off your conference this morning. I've been asked to speak for about 20 minutes to set the scene for your theme of innovation and results, which I take to mean that you want to look forwards to see how the events industry is likely to evolve over the next 5, 10, 15 years globally. I'm clearly not an expert on Brazil to talk to you about how your industry is going to develop here in Brazil. I'm here to learn that from all of you, but I'm happy to share with you a few thoughts on this based on some of the research work that has been done by my team, and more importantly by a lot of discussions and workshops with our UFI members and our UFI leadership on what we think the future shape of the industry might be and what are really the key trends which will impact how we all see our businesses developing. Our executive committee, which is the sort of top leadership group of UFI, asked how should we develop our organization, and the obvious answer is that it needs to meet the future needs of the industry. And after a lot of discussion, came down to these four sort of key trends, really, that we see continuing to reshape the way in which our industry works. And I'll talk about all four of them in a little more detail. You can see them there. I won't read them out, and hopefully will explain a little more what we mean here. Sorry, that's probably a little small, so for anybody who's struggling to read that, apologies. But I'll move through this quickly, but the globalization, it's been the topic of much discussion. You here in Brazil have been the focus of much of that discussion over the past 5 to 10 years. It's clear that as a result of the crisis which struck particularly in Europe, but all parts of the world 5 or 6 years ago, we have seen a rebalancing of the world economy with new centers of power. And notwithstanding that times are slightly tougher right now than perhaps they have been over the last 5 or 6 years, it is still clear that the new centers of developing economy in the world are increasingly important in our industry. We are also moving into a period of slower growth. Much of the world has, frankly, grown very quickly in recent years on the back of extraordinary growth in the world's second largest economy, China. China is slowing, as it inevitably must do, as it reaches the size of the economy that it is, and that will have an impact on all of us, and we will have to learn to live our business lives without the extra strong coffee of exports to China. And this is not a comment directed specifically at Brazil, it's a comment directed at much of the world. There's nothing wrong with the economy growing in China. In many ways, so it's slowing in China. In many ways, it's quite a healthy development, but it's different to what it was in the last 10 to 20 years. we recognize within UFI, and I think all of you know this from your businesses as well, that there cannot be clearly a single one-size-fits-all approach to doing business around the world. And we at UFI, along with all of you, are trying to work out the best ways to localize what we do. The next two are really linked. I'm not going to spend too much time on this now, this issue of digitalization, but we all recognize that the next generation of consumers interact with one another, they absorb information, they access information, they do business with one another in different ways as a result of the huge digital transformation of the last 10 to 15 years. This continues to provide us with many, many interesting business opportunities. I will quickly say I think the consensus is now clear that this does not threaten our business so long as we do not choose to ignore it. We had a meeting in London last week of 120 CEOs from global exhibition companies. This topic of digitalization and the way in which the next generation of our customers and our employees work with one another, the way they network, the ways in which they communicate, dramatically changing, and it will for sure have an impact on the way our fairs look, on the way we organize them, on the way people want to pay us. At the end of the day is perhaps the most important element of that. And this whole issue of managing community sounds very grand consultant sort of speak. What we mean by that is you serve industries through the trade fairs that you organize, and traditionally we have typically served those industries once a year for 4 or 5 days, sometimes a week, but really just for a very short period of the year. It is clearly understood now that there is both an opportunity and a need for us to find ways to interact intelligently and hopefully profitably with the communities that we serve year-round. And that is what they expect of us, and that's where the opportunity is, and frankly, that's where the competition will be coming from if we don't do it ourselves. And the last point there in terms of sustainable growth, I do not just mean that in terms of environmental issues, although those are obviously increasingly important. It involves the economic sustainability of our business, looking at return on investment for our customers. Rather importantly, for many of you in the room, return on investment for our venue managers and developers. There are increasingly complex demands on the venues that we use. They are increasingly expensive and sophisticated buildings. I'll talk a bit more about this in a minute. And many serious questions being asked in Europe and elsewhere about how we get returns on that investment. Overall, and I discussed this with at least 2 people here in Sao Paulo yesterday, so this is not perhaps a European view. I think this is shared by many people. This is a conservative industry. Most exhibitions look pretty much like they did 20 years ago. Pricing in most of the companies, 1 or 2 in the room represented being exceptions, but pricing in most companies untouchable. We like the way we do this. And I think everybody in the room would have to agree that we have at best only partially grasped the opportunity that technology provides us with. Why is that? Well, the why is really good news, because this is a very profitable, very successful industry. And typically, we don't turn upside down and tamper and destroy very profitable businesses. Our friends in the business magazine publishing world have had a much harder time over the last 10 to 20 years. They have had no choice but to turn their business models upside down because the old one stopped working for many of them. We see other industries which have been completely transformed by technology have had to rewrite their rule books. So far, we have not, but that does not mean that we should not need to. I'll talk quickly. I think I don't want to take up too much of the panel's time. But when we got down to the specifics of events, those first 4 issues were the sort of the broad, big strategic issues that we think will impact the industry. Now coming a bit more down to events. The technology allows us to engage with our participants in very, very different ways. Juan Pablo's boss has said on a number of occasions, the day of somebody randomly walking into your trade fair, wandering around, hoping that something good happens, is not really the business model of our future. And also, interesting presentation in London last week, a young Irishman just launched an event called the Web Summit. It's been going for 4 years. These guys had no background in the events industry at all. Their first event attracted 400 people. They now attract, after 4 years, 22,000 people to their conference, which inevitably, as a result, now has a 20,000 square meter exhibition alongside it. They expect 35,000 people this year. These are young web developers, technology people going to Dublin. I mean, we're not talking about going to Las Vegas or to one of the big cities in Germany. They're going to Dublin in Ireland, which is partly because the pubs are very good and they like the Irish beer. But it's partly because these young people who organized this event said, you know, we knew nothing about the events industry, but we go to lots of music festivals. So actually, we designed this event, as we know, to look like a music festival. Now, I am not proposing that all of you go away, throw away how you do business and reorganize everything to look like a music festival. Of course not. But when we talk about engaging participants, the look and feel of the event, the focus on content, bear that thought in mind. It's a simplistic way of describing it. But we need to be finding ways to provide much richer experiences to the attendees at our events, personalizing it so that if Juan Pablo comes to an event, he probably has 5 things he particularly wants to do. Ligia may have 5 as well, but they're going to be 5 quite different things. And we need to be able to make sure somebody wants to come and they want it to be really cheap because they run a small company, they want to stay in a cheap hotel, they want to get there in the cheapest way, and they want to pay the lowest price. We should be able to tolerate that. At the same time, perhaps somebody else, one of you in the room, you don't really want to come on the cheap. You want to stay in the nicest hotel and you want a special service to take you to the 6 companies you want to see and nobody else. And we should be easily able, with the technology now, to tailor our events to those sorts of needs. Can we move away? I had a discussion with at least one of you yesterday about this. Can we move away from conventional floor plans, make more imaginative use of how people actually want to work together? I know one of your colleagues, Juan Pablo, told me last week that one of the most successful features of one of your events in New York recently was a huge open space full of bean bags in which the young people coming to the event sat down and networked with one another. Not such good news, perhaps, to the exhibitor who builds a 1,000 square meter stand, 3 stories with everything else when everybody's at the other end of the hall sitting on bean bags interacting with each other. But that was the single most popular feature of the event. Many people think that there is a strong likelihood that many industries will fragment into much smaller, more intimate events. The technology allows us to do this, to get 500 people together in one place who have a very specific interest, may be much more powerful for some of them than to get 100,000 people in a 50,000 square meter exhibition. Perhaps good news for the customers, not such good news for us in the exhibition industry, because we all know that the most profitable, the biggest fairs are the biggest fairs. I mean, they make very good, the business model for those events is very powerful, but it may not be what the industry wants. So when I say we are conservative, 2 pictures for you. On the left, what is argued often to be the first modern exhibition, the Great Exhibition in London in 1851. On the right, an exhibition in London in 2013. Not so much progress, perhaps, in 150 years. The old floor plan, one of our members found, is 100 years old. The one on the right, just done last year. Surely we can do better than that, everybody. Architects, if we look at what architects were able to do with a drawing board and their rulers 50 years ago, their buildings look like that, and that was the trend of the time. Now, with the power of computers, we have buildings that look like the one on the right. Surely we have the power in our hands to be more imaginative. So if your trade show really still kind of looks like this, if you went with your grandfather as a little boy to a trade show and it looked like that, ask yourself seriously, does your fair still look like that today? Because many do. Perhaps the school uniforms of the children are a little more fashionable these days. I don't know what they wear here in Brazil, but many fairs really still look quite similar to that. That was a home show which almost died until it was taken over by a company who reorganized it. I'm slightly depressed to say they reorganized it according to the model of IKEA, so that you can only go into this home show and then you can never, ever, ever get out. But there is more to be done in the way that we organize our fairs. I wanted just to put this slide up. I was actually talking to this one 3 weeks ago in Shanghai, where there are some quite dramatic changes underway in terms of the venue capacity in Shanghai, which has just doubled since the new venue there opened this year. Now has the world's largest venue, just having opened there with 410,000 square meters of indoor space. It's a frighteningly impressive building. But I think the point there I want to make, you all can see and decide where you, in whichever city, I assume some of you come from other cities as well, where some of you sit. And wherever we are, it's somewhere between the green and the purple here. We're not at a basic level. You've got all, for many years you've had the capacity here. We are in a process where additional space is being added. But more importantly, particularly for the venue owners, I think is the purple box on the right there, in that the expectations of our clients for the quality of event that we can deliver to them is transforming probably faster than we are able to meet their changing needs. Interesting project in Switzerland recently, Basel. Some of you are familiar with the Basel Fair, which organizes the big watch and jewelry fair and the art fair. Just to hold this in our minds, because it's a real dramatic change from what has happened in venue development anywhere in the world before. Basel demolished an old hall, not so old, 30 years, but they demolished an old hall. They spent 400 million Swiss francs, roughly, well, Swiss francs just increased in 20% against the euro anyway, for a lot of money to redevelop that hall. And I think the first time in the world this has ever happened, the new hall they built on the same site was slightly smaller than the old one. So I'm not ever aware of a venue demolishing its old halls, building new ones, big investment, smaller hall. But it was much more sophisticated. They're a special case. They organize for the world's top watch companies. They organize for art fairs. They have very, very, very demanding customers. But it's an indication. And if I talk to the big venues in Europe, they're all saying to me, we have to invest hundreds of millions of euros in the coming few years in upgrading our venues to meet the expectations of our clients. And at the moment, we, that's the venues, say to me, we are very nervous because we do not know how we are going to charge for that. But it is very clear that if the industry's events are to be successful in the future, we will have to find a way to do that. Two last slides, briefly looking at the results of all of this, where we're going. Number one, where's the world going in our industry? We now at UFI twice a year do a research project we call the Global Barometer. Thank you for those of you in the room who contribute to that. We take input from around 200 CEOs around the world. Now, I'm realizing there what I don't have for you is a key, so you don't know what those colored lines mean, but I'll tell you, the green is the Middle East, the red is the Americas. We have to, in the upcoming one, separate North and South America. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to combine the two, but that's what we've been doing so far. The blue, slightly depressingly flat one there is Europe. The yellow is Asia. Basic word coming out of the industry at the moment, Europe continuing flat at best. We have some big issues in Europe. Obviously, once again, thanks to our friends in Greece, the euro is in unstable territory, combined with the pressures in the northeastern corner of Europe from the problems in Russia and the Ukraine, mean this is a fairly difficult time in Europe. We're not expecting great results from Europe. Asia is still, as I described earlier, learning to live with the new, slower growth in China, although basically it's still growing well. The good news story at the moment appears to be coming out of the United States, where we're seeing the strongest growth in the world. So no surprise that several of the big British companies have recently made very substantial investments in the United States to increase their exposure to the US market. Final point I wanted to make. I had a very good discussion with Armando and his colleagues yesterday at UBRAFE about a number of things about how we around the world communicate with governments. I just want to leave this one last thought to you in terms of results. It's very important, obviously, that we communicate effectively with governments on the impact that we have, which translates in politicians speak into the number of jobs that we generate. The point I wanted to make here, and congratulations to UBRAFE for the work that you've done on that, because I think that sort of is a critical stepping stone to being able to communicate effectively with government. The work we're doing, and the thought I want to leave in your heads, is that typically these studies measure what goes on in our own industry within the exhibition business, what the venues, what the organizers, what the service providers get out of the industry, the jobs that supports, and the tourism impact, the people staying in the hotels, using the airlines, the restaurants, etc. And that's a good number. And the tourism impact is usually far larger than the exhibition industry impact itself. We support far more jobs in the hotels. Certainly your numbers here in Sao Paulo are remarkable. If you're proposing that 70% of hotel room nights here are linked to business events. That's an extraordinary figure. But as you can see, and I've drawn the pyramid there intentionally, there's a far, far bigger number that we do not yet effectively communicate, which is the impact we have on the industries that we serve with our exhibitions. How much business and how many jobs is really linked to the exhibitions that we organize? And I don't mean the traditional press release that says $500 million, reals, whatever number you want to use, of business was done at this week's toy fair, gift fair, jewelry fair, air show. We all know that our PR people walk out with a drink in their hand at the end of the show and go and say, should we say 500 this year? It's a good number, isn't it? Yeah, great number, let's say 500. And that's about as scientific as we've been in the past. We need to be better at that, because actually I have looked at 2 projects in that area, and when it's done well, the numbers can be huge of the numbers of jobs that we support. If you think your exhibitors would say to you conservatively, our participation in your exhibitions generates 10% of our new business each year. And I think 10% would be quite a conservative number. That starts to translate into a very large number of jobs. And we at UFI are working with associations all around the world, and we'll be happy to work with UBRAFE on this as well, on trying to come up with some better ways of communicating that number, because there is no doubt that this industry supports huge numbers of jobs. We ourselves are not big employers by the standards of many industries. But what we do has a very, very big impact on the economy of the cities in which the exhibition takes place, of the country in which the exhibition takes place, and that all translates into jobs, and politicians understand jobs, because people with jobs are happy and elect them, and people without jobs are unhappy and don't elect them. And so it's a very important issue. I will stop talking there. I'm sorry I've gone slightly over my 20 minutes, but I hope that is a useful way of setting the scene for the rest of our discussion, and I look forward to hearing what the rest of the panelists have to say, and look forward to meeting as many of you as possible during the day. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado, Paul.